Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today we're getting to the waiver wire, heading into week 4 of fantasy football. I've got 6 must-add players for you guys, and as well, I'll share a few players you can drop this week as well if you want to add these guys. Everybody in this group here is under 50% rostered. That's what we're going to do each and every week. Players that are under 50% rostered. If you find this information valuable, if we've been able to help you out this season, would really appreciate it if you did hit that subscribe button down below and drop a like on this video. As well, if there's any positions or players I might have missed that you want to hear from me on, I'm happy to answer those questions in the comments down below. But let's get into these players, starting with the Chargers. My favorite team has lost a big piece to the offensive puzzle in Mike Williams, and we are left to pick up the pieces here with some impactful fantasy players. So there's obviously 2 guys that you can potentially add this week. One, Josh Palmer, will be widely available, and the second, Quentin Johnston, is a bit less available in leagues. But let's start with Palmer, who I think is the more immediate fix for your fantasy team, an immediate plug-and-play type of guy. Because with Williams out, Palmer looks to be the player that will get on the field and benefit the most right off the hop, and that is because he's already been on the field quite a bit as the wide receiver 3. We saw him be productive this past week against the Vikings too, scoring, posting about, I think, 60 receiving yards or so, and also having about 4 or 5 receptions. Palmer has an advantage over Quentin Johnston pretty significantly here so far. 93 to 38 advantage in routes run and a 13 to 8 advantage in targets. Johnston just isn't getting on the field very much. Palmer is the more trusted guy for this team, and we got to see him last year. There was plenty of last season where we saw Palmer playing without Mike Williams or without Keenan Allen or without both, even much, or probably just as much without both of them as he did have with just one of them out. But what I want to do is do what we have right now. Look at what we have right now, which is Palmer without Mike Williams. So what I did was I looked at the games, and there were 7 games where either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen didn't play, where one of these guys was available. Palmer averaged 8.4 half PPR fantasy points per game, 7 targets per game. Production isn't fantastic, but right now that puts him as the wide receiver 36 in fantasy points per game, ahead of guys like Tyler Lockett, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and Jalen Waddle. So good enough for you, and one that you could viably put into your lineup and play in plus matchups. And we do have one coming up against the Raiders, which could potentially return you some fantasy production and value if you do plug him in and play him immediately. The other thing that you have to keep in mind, though, as well, is like this offense is better under Kellen Moore than it was last year under Joe Lombardi. I definitely think it looks like that through the first 3 weeks. And Palmer last season only had 3 receptions of 20 plus air yards. This year he already has 2. So to me, that tells me that this is going to be a guy who will be even better without Mike Williams than he was last season without Mike Williams or Keenan Allen. So this is someone that could get to being, a back end wide receiver 2, more likely probably in that front end wide receiver 3 territory in fantasy points per game, which is going to be valuable to your team. And again, in those plus matchups you can play. So if you need help in the immediate, Josh Palmer's the guy I would get who's just 2% rostered right now. Okay, now moving over to Johnston, who's currently 32% rostered right now in most fantasy leagues. So we've got a guy who isn't widely available, but you see him at that roster percentage, and maybe there's going to be more people diving in on Williams because he's a guy who was obviously drafted with a first-round pick, 22nd overall by the Chargers last season, but he hasn't been able to carve out a consistent role in this offense. But this is the insurance policy the Chargers drafted. I think that part of the reason they drafted Johnston is because of the injury history of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. So now he's going to get the opportunity to do so, because I guarantee you he's going to be on the field more similarly to what Josh Palmer was, and even a little bit more, because of the fact there really isn't, Darius Davis is another rookie they drafted at TCU. Beyond that, there aren't really a lot of guys with any proven potential on this team other than Johnston. But when he is on the field, they have given him opportunities. He's only had a 27.9% route participation rate so far through the first 3 weeks, 21% target rate. So his targets when he is on the field, they're actually pretty decent. So if he takes that target rate and puts it into an actual full sample size of a game, we could see him give you a little bit of value right off the hop. I don't think that's the case, though. The concerns with this team was consistency, drops. It's been a problem for him in college. It's been a problem for him in the preseason. It was a problem for him in training camp. But he's going to be on the field now and be able to prove this draft pedigree that he has. So long term, this is an investment I can make sense of making. He's someone that could replicate the downfield production Mike Williams has had. He's 6'3". He's got great straight line game speed, and he's also a tremendous guy when it comes to catch radius and making plays. When he isn't dropping the ball, he can make catches that not a lot of players can make when it comes to a contested catch situations. So Johnston is still valuable. I just don't want people to get over their skis, and Johnston is definitely a long-term investment, where Palmer is the guy that will be more likely to give you immediate production. Okay, I feel like I have to mention this guy, Tank Dell. He's 31% rostered. We talked about him last week, and I want to bring him up again because some of the things I was asking questions about in terms of, hey, this looks interesting. We literally saw it happen yet again because Dell had more routes run and was on the field more often than Nico Collins now for back-to-back weeks. So I'm really interested to see if this continues to be the case. He had a 26-24 advantage in routes run. Nothing significant, nothing crazy, but still, we're seeing Collins come off the field to keep Dell on it, which I think is telling. And he also moved out to getting more of his routes out wide as opposed to in the slot. He was a closer split in the week previous. Now we're seeing him more be that outside guy that consistently stays on the field. And then we're seeing Robert Woods running those routes from the slot. And now Noah Brown was out, and that's why we saw Dell get more opportunity last week. And since then, he's posted 17 targets the last 2 weeks. So really impressive number, 8.5 targets per game. This past week leads the team in targets, receptions, yards, everything. And I mean, this is just an opportunity here for a guy that I think is in an offense where CJ Stroud is doing a great job taking care of the football, but he's also putting the ball downfield and being able to make some explosive plays. He's not putting the ball, throwing a ton of 20 plus air yard passes, but those like 10 to 19 air yards, he actually leads the league. So he's been able to put the ball into some situations where you can create some explosive plays and be a little bit more productive than just Dell getting, targets that are 5-6 yards from line of scrimmage. These are opportunities that are valuable for fantasy when we're looking at plays that are being made down the fields. The Steelers are up, and they have struggled the first 3 weeks of the season against these outside guys. We saw Devontae Adams on Sunday night. We saw Amari Cooper in week 2. And then who did Steelers have in week 1? Oh, the Niners, and Brandon Ayuk went off. So Dell could be in for another opportunity similar to that. He's definitely someone that has some really, really intriguing long-term fantasy value for me. So his talent is really solid. He had a ton of production at Houston in his final season of college, and he could be bringing that over into the NFL, and Stroud looks to be very, very ready here as a rookie. So if he's still available in your league, I do like him. He's not like a 20% of my FAAB type of player, definitely more in that 10 to 12% range. But honestly, someone long-term, I do want to find out what we have here. All right, last wide receiver we're going to talk about, Rashee Rice. He's 26% rostered, and he has been super, super productive in limited opportunity. That really has me wanting to take a shot at him amongst all these receivers in this Chiefs room. I know we talked about dropping Sky Moore. Kadarius Toney hasn't really done anything that makes me want to be starting him. Rice is really interesting. He's got a 35.9% target rate. He's had 14 targets on just 39 routes run. His yards per route run, 2.77 yards, which is 13th in the entire NFL. Very, very fun little opportunity we have here with a guy who's still pretty decently rostered, but when he's on the field, he's getting the ball quite a bit. He could have had his second touchdown of the season. He fell just short against the Bears on Sunday, and he had 7 targets, 5 receptions, 59 receiving yards. All 3 of those numbers were the most of any Chiefs wide receiver. So if Rice is getting on the field more and he takes some of this target rate that he's had and replicates that into a bit more of a significant amount of volume when he's being on the field, we're seeing someone that could finally bring some value out of this Chiefs offense or from this Chiefs receiver room, which we haven't really seen so far. And he ran the most routes that he has in any single game this past week against Chicago. So it's kind of increasing week over week, and he's getting those routes from the slot as well. 68.3% of his routes are from the slot. So I could see an opportunity for him being the number 1 slot guy on this team. He ran the most routes of any receiver from the slot this past week. If he's that guy, combine that with maybe him, Marquez Valdes-Scantling outside, because Valdes-Scantling's been staying on the field the most of any Chiefs receiver. So if he's getting into the slot, maybe more kicks out to the other spot out wide, and maybe he finds a way to keep himself on the field all the time, and I could really see him replicating production, because that is what the slot has kind of been able to give to this Chiefs receiver room, especially with Juju last year with his volume. Most of it was coming from the slot. Rice is the most intriguing guy to me as he's been proven to be able to score some touchdowns too. Okay, our only tight end that we'll be talking about this week, Luke Musgrave, 18% rostered. I talked about him in week 1 as well, but I want to bring this back up because, again, he's less than 20% rostered right now, so he's still available. He, in my mind, between himself, Jaden Reed, and Romeo Doubs is the only guy I feel confident in being able to trust once Christian Watson is back. And I mean, it's been 3 weeks now. Watson isn't back. I figure he's going to be back really, really soon, like maybe potentially this week. Maybe they sat him this past week with a short week coming up against Detroit on Thursday. Even if he does miss, yes, Romeo Doubs is someone to add still. But what I like about Musgrave is he's run the most routes of any Packers player in the first 3 games of the year. He led the team in routes run in every single one of these first 3 weeks. Last week, 8 targets, 6 receptions, 49 receiving yards. yards. That'll do it for me at the tight end position. I will take that every week, to be honest with you, if I don't have one of these elite guys, instead of playing any guessing games with any others in the streaming side of things, because Musgrave looks to be a guy you can just kind of plug in and play and leave him there, and we'll see what happens for you week in and week out. But he's 8th in receptions with 11. He's 7th in yards with 124. And what I like even better amongst like all these other tight ends, he's getting looks down the field. His average depth of target is 10.9 yards. The only guy that's higher is Kyle Pitts. So I like to see that. I know Pitts is in an offense that's much lower passing volume, whereas Musgrave's in one that's a little bit higher. He's the tight end 15 through 3 weeks, so he's not doing anything crazy here. But I like everything I'm seeing because he's on the field. He's getting decent volume, and he's also getting downfield opportunities. And I felt like this past week he missed, remember one specifically that was probably would have been minimum a 25-yard gain, but Love overthrew him. So I like what we're getting from Musgrave in terms of combining volume with some downfield opportunities. That's something you don't see from a lot of tight ends, and Musgrave's been able to do it. So 18% rostered, one of the main targets for me at the tight end spot if he's still available. Last up, the guy that put together the best fantasy performance from any of these players by a wide margin at the running back position, that is Achane. He's 41% rostered, so not available in a ton of leagues. He went from being a healthy and active in week 1, so a player that could have been dropped in a lot of fantasy leagues, to just 1 carry and 6 snaps in week 2, to then leading the team in rushing attempts with 18 and 203 yards, scoring 4 touchdowns. Definitely didn't see this thing coming. And you look into it a little deeper, and I'm even more concerned for Raheem Mostert and more looking towards Achane providing value. He had an 8-2 advantage on red zone touches over Mostert. Now, Mostert had more inside the 5 carries, 2-1, but again, Achane still got one of those opportunities, which I was surprised to see. But another surprising thing, Mostert ran more routes, 18-11. That's where I thought Achane's role was going to be as a receiver out of the backfield as opposed to getting the ball the most on the ground. But man, he looked very explosive, very good. Now, every guy that touched the ball on the ground for the Dolphins looked good, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But I'm trying to wrap my head around this performance. What do I expect and project moving forward? And the more I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I think this might have a little bit to do with Waddle being out. Like, Achane's a super speedy, twitchy player that can create some create some yards after the catch and create some yards after contact, which he certainly did. So maybe this was more of like, hey, Jalen Waddle's out. We need to bring in another playmaker. Who knows how ready Achane is? We're going to take a shot on this guy to give us some explosive plays, because the Dolphins, check out this stat that I found on Twitter, but it's from Next Gen Stats. The Dolphins currently have all 5 of the fastest ball carriers on the season in terms of miles per hour on a given play. So there is Raheem Mostert, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Achane, like all these guys with just ridiculous speed and explosive play potential. So it makes sense to get Achane back on the field. And the matchups the next few weeks are pretty solid. The Bills are nothing to get too excited about, but the Giants and the Panthers, the 2 weeks following, those are 2 great opportunities for running backs. The Giants especially, people have been able to score a number of touchdowns. I think there's 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns they've given up already through the first 3 weeks. So there's opportunity there for Achane to be super productive right off the hop. And you can't forget about Raheem Mostert's injury history being a factor here as well. Never really been able to stay on the field a ton. He's been good so far. No problems there, but something could come up, so that makes Achane valuable in and of itself. The way this Dolphins offense is operating, I got no problem adding Achane, even if he is the running back 2 right now. If he puts together the opportunities and the volume he got last week, then he's technically the RB1, so certainly worth an add. Okay, quickly, before we wrap things up, a few players to drop this week. I got 4 for you. I'll just quickly rapid fire on what I think about these guys. Rashad Bateman finally got an opportunity as the number 2 in this offense. He's being outproduced by Nelson Aguilar in back-to-back weeks now, dealing with a hamstring injury too. I just don't see it coming anytime soon. If Odell Beckham gets back on the field, we just know he's securely in that wide receiver 3 role, technically the number 4 pass catcher behind Mark Andrews. I think it's safe. You can drop him. I don't really see any reason for things to be able to bounce back or for you to add him again. Juju Smith-Schuster continues to come off the field far too much. If I'm playing Juju Smith-Schuster and he's going to be valuable in my fantasy team, it's because he's on the field a ton and the Patriots are throwing the ball like 50 times a game. So it would be valuable if he was. He isn't. Like Devontae Parker and Kendrick Bourne are looking to be more valuable than him. And even then, those guys aren't guys I'm trusting to start. So Smith-Schuster, an easy drop. Damian Harris, look, the only way you start Damian Harris is if he's scoring touchdowns, and that's really hard to predict now because Latavius Murray is getting more of those opportunities. Harris was basically on the field in garbage time was when he was getting his rushing opportunities. He seems like a safe drop. And then Darnell Mooney, the Bears passing offense, not operating. I can't believe Mooney's even like over 30% 30% rostered right now. If you have him, absolutely drop him for any of these guys we talked about. There's way more upside with all these guys over a guy like Darnell Mooney right now. Okay, those are my must-add targets for week 4. Again, if you guys have any questions about some guys I did not mention, or looking for something at the quarterback position, or maybe a few more options or some stash options at quarterback or running back, happy to answer those questions in the comments down below. Definitely leave them there. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it if you hit that like button if you did enjoy, and we will see you guys on the next one.